Ni hao, and it's great to have your company for News Hour on CCTV International. I'm Edwin Ma in Beijing with your 60-minute window on China and the world. And in our top story, Premier Wen Jiabao has held separate telephone conversations on climate change with the Indian Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and the Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The three leaders agreed to enhance coordination and cooperation to deal with climate change as the UN Climate Change Conference continues in Copenhagen. Also on Thursday, Premier Wen and the British Prime Minister Gordon Brown held an in-depth and candid telephone discussion of their views on the issues surrounding the climate. Wen is due to attend the Copenhagen conference. China has warned rich nations not to shirk their responsibilities on climate change. It is urging them to provide developing countries with the funds they need to tackle the issue. Here's Zhang Yajing with the details.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry says developed nations are acting insincerely in their apparent commitment to helping poor countries.
We think there has been a big gap in the sincerity of developed countries in terms of financing at the moment. They haven't done enough to shoulder their due responsibilities.
The Department Director General stresses rich countries bear most of the responsibility for creating existing pollution. Therefore, the idea that developing nations have to make cuts is both unrealistic and goes against the consensus already reached.
Any attempt to require developing countries to shoulder the responsibility of cutting emissions is not consistent with the international consensus, nor will it be conducive to reaching a new agreement by the international community in fighting climate change in the future.
The past few days of the UN Climate Change Conference have exposed deep differences on emissions cuts and funding needed to address the problem. The US has pledged to contribute to a rich country fund which aims to help poor nations tackle the issue. But the US Special Envoy for Climate Change says China will not be a recipient of the fund as it has a booming economy and large foreign exchange reserves. China insists the offer of funds be an imperative duty of developed nations. It hopes the relevant parties will make the effort to achieve results acceptable to all sides. Zhang Yajing, CCTV.
Earlier, we spoke with Professor Qi Ye from Tsinghua University about the climate conference in Copenhagen. He gave us his analysis about the growing differences at the talks between developed and developing countries.
Days into Copenhagen, we have already seen very different, quite divided opinions and positions regarding reaching a global agreement at Copenhagen. I think this really demonstrates, each country right now is really focusing on defending their own national interests rather than on the achieving a global agreement. The key to the successfully achieving a global agreement, and this very critical event, is for the developed countries to really take the leadership.
And Dr. Qi also talked about the prospects of mutually beneficial cooperation in tackling climate change.
This is about undelivered promise. A long time ago, started in United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and also reconfirmed in Kyoto Protocol, and also the Bali Roadmap. What we're seeing right now is these promises, responsibilities have never materialized. And we have just heard from the chief negotiator of the United States, Todd Stern. He just plainly denied any kind of a responsibility and, death or reparations. He's totally lack of logic in defending this responsibility for financing and for technology.
The deputy head of the Chinese delegation to the Copenhagen conference, Su Wei, has stated that China's stance on cutting greenhouse gas emissions, as he has also outlined the key points that will lead to a successful and meaningful conference. Yuan Yifeng has more.
The core issue is whether to stick to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, Kyoto Protocol and the Bali Roadmap. The chief Chinese negotiator at the UN climate talks says China's stance is very clear, that China is going to tackle the issue by cooperating with other countries.
We should stick to the Kyoto Protocol, which says the developed countries and developing countries should shoulder common but differentiated responsibilities for climate change. The developed nations should take the lead in reducing their carbon emissions by a large margin, and at the same time provide financial and technological support to the developing world. Of course, under the framework of sustainable development and after receiving support from developed countries, developing nations should take effective and positive action against climate change.
Su Wei says China, as a leading country in the developing world, has already formed policies on the issue, and related plans and actions are already being taken. So what sort of measures should other parts of the world take?
The developed nations should bring clear and notable targets on cutting their carbon emissions, and they should also provide a specific figure for the financial support for developing countries, as well as concrete measures for technological support.
The chief Chinese negotiator says reaching an agreement on these basic points will make the Copenhagen conference successful and meaningful. Yuanfang, CCTV.